Social Security, as I said, uses 5 steps in the evaluation of disability. And I mentioned the listings. And it's important you know about the listings. You don't have to memorize them because they're pages and pages and pages. Okay? Just be aware that you know they exist and your doctor knows they exist in case you have to apply for disability. The listings are really critical in autoimmune and connective tissue group of impairments. Impairments like scleroderma, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, those types of things. Does your condition equal a listing? If your condition equals a listing, you pass go, okay? Go right past go and you win the game, okay? If not, you don't necessarily pass go, but it's a lot more work to show you have a combination of conditions or a similar condition which is equivalent to a listing. Now, all your doctor can do is give an opinion. That opinion is not binding on Social Security as to really whether you meet a listing or equal a listing. But if your doctor don't give the opinion, they're probably not even going to think to address the opinion. Social Security adjudication requires a doctor selected by the commissioner to make this determination. So if your doctor says, my client has a combination of scleroderma and rheumatoid arthritis, and even though they don't meet the listing, I believe they equal the listing, they're not going to accept your doctor's say-so, but they'll send it to one of their physicians to look at it and give a final opinion. I got to tell you, in my experience doing this 35 years, most doctors are incredibly honest. They don't have a stake in this, and they think scientifically. So they will answer the questions you pose to them. Okay, so if you pose the question, is it equivalent, and they're of a mind to answer that question, they'll give you their best opinion. Generally, if a treating doctor who knows this impairment, knows this area, says it's equivalent or it meets a listing, usually the government doctor is not really going to take issue with it because, quite frankly, treating doctors don't lie. That's the bottom line. They just tell it as it is. So with that in mind, my experience has been if claimant's doctor gives me that, I'm halfway there. Because if a government doctor tries to dispute that, I usually can blow them away. Now, why do you want to establish your claim meets or equals a listing? Why is that important? And how do you do that? Okay, well, it's important for a lot of reasons. If possible, I always try to do it medically, okay? And there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one, I told you, listings are presumptively disabling. So if we have an opinion from a treating doctor that you meet the listings and it's supported by the medical evidence that any other doctor looking at it would have to agree, you're home, you're there, okay? Number two, we don't have to deal with that whole ancillary group of factors that I mentioned before, like residual function, functional capacity. It's very difficult to quantify even in a simple orthopedic case. You can get 10 doctors with a different opinion on functional capacity, let alone a case of a systemic disease, an autoimmune disease, a connective tissue disease. Because what a doctor has to do is say, well, you can lift 2 pounds or 10 pounds and you can walk 2 blocks. How the hell is a doctor going to do that? And a lot of doctors just refuse. They say, how do I know what they can do on a given day? They really can't answer that question or fill in those charts. So if I can avoid having to ask them to do that, I want to do that. Because if I don't get that from a treating doctor, the government doctor who's never examined you can make up your functional capacity. That goes in the record, and we're both screwed. You're not going to get benefits, and I'm not going to win the case, okay? So I don't want that to happen. I want every case I file, if I can't show listings, to have a functional capacity assessment in that file. Part of my voice. Because this was very important to me, this lecture, of course I came down with a cold yesterday. That always happens, right? Okay. Doctors hate to fill out residual functional capacity forms. Right, Harry? Absolutely. Absolutely, okay. You do it. You do it, but you can't do it, right?
Can I ask my comment here?
Yeah.
Especially the patient. You see a patient, say, with lupus, was limited by pain and fatigue, which you can't measure, how do you fill that out?
How we doing on time?
How can you ever say it? No, I can't do it. I mean,
Right.
it's impossible.
And therein is the problem. It's impossible. But since I'm a lawyer and I deal in fictions for a living, we make it possible. Okay. Okay. It's not that I want to deal with the fictions. We're required to. Many patients have manifestations which require several different specialists, none of whom can make that functional capacity assessment because they're just dealing in areas where it's not relevant to how they treat. How we deal with medical issues and how doctors deal with issues is really on two different planets, okay? You go to a doctor to get better or to manage your condition, okay? We don't think in those terms. We think in what do we have to prove to get what you came to us for. I mentioned compassionate allowances. Let me tell you what they are, hoping that none of you ever have to go here, but maybe somebody you know, you'll hear about it. There's a whole list of cases. Every one of them is cancer. If you know somebody with cancer, they should apply for disability right away, okay, and ask for a compassionate allowance, because those cases get put on top of the stack. And why is that? A lot of those people don't live 12 months, okay? They have a condition which is likely to result in death, and you shouldn't make... My uncle had cancer, put in for disability, he never saw it. He didn't live long enough. So this is designed to get around those terrible stories that you hear all the time. Getting back to the listings, why we try to do it medically, why we try not to put Dr. Spear and his colleagues to do the impossible, why I'd rather do this the way a doctor would do it. We avoid having the client's case denied on the basis of vocational factors, okay? If you think that the fictions we ask the doctors to create are far-fetched, you should see what they do on vocational level and how that testimony goes. Because on a vocational factor, they'll say, what is your age, education, and work experience? And based upon a functional capacity in the file, they'll come up with jobs you could do, and you lose. We try to avoid that if possible. And finally, we try to avoid having your case decided on the basis of credibility. What's credibility? You go before a judge at a hearing, and that judge is in a bad mood and doesn't like your shirt and decides to go after you and starts nitpicking every statement you've made, even though your medical evidence is solid, you can lose that case. You get a decision, I find the claimant not credible. Quite frankly, I don't want my clients going to hearings. I don't want them tripping up in their testimony. I don't want any mistakes happening. And the way you do that is to try and keep them away from hearings. Because at a hearing, anything can happen. What happens at a hearing? We'll get to that. Okay?